Have you ever had that moment where you think, right, I really need to do this? You have been meaning to talk to your autistic tween about puberty, bodies, privacy, consent, sex, or safety. You know it matters, and you know you cannot keep putting it off. So you finally sit down, brace yourself, and think, okay, we're just going to cover it all, and then it goes badly. Maybe they shut down. Maybe your tween, they said, I know, and tried to leave. Maybe they got silly. Maybe they got annoyed. Or maybe they looked blank or didn't respond at all. And afterwards, you're left thinking, well, that was awful. If that's happened, you're not the only one. And more importantly, it does not mean your child cannot learn sex ed. It doesn't mean that they're not ready. And it also doesn't mean that you failed. A lot of the time, what failed was the format, because one big sex talk often doesn't work very well for autistic tweens. I've spent more than 25 years helping families teach sex ed in ways that actually work in real life. And one thing I see over and over is this. When parents feel pressure to get it done, they often try to do too much in one go. And for autistic tweens, that can create overload really quickly. Too much language, too much pressure, emotional expectation to respond, as well as too much all at once. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through why one big sex talk usually backfires with autistic tweens, why silence or delayed responses do not mean it failed, and what works better instead. And stay with me, because at the end, I'll give you a 1-minute challenge that will make this feel a whole lot more doable. What if talking to your tween about sex felt cringe-free and more natural? Welcome to Sex Ed for Tween Parents, where sex ed stays real. This season, we're focusing on autistic tween and what helps sex ed actually land. I'm CATH HAKANSON, sex educator, autistic AuDHD mum, and I'm here to help you move from panic and pressure to sex ed that's just bloody effective. The first thing I want to say is this. A lot of us were raised to think that sex ed is one talk. One important talk, an awkward talk, and a birds and bees talk. One moment where you sit down, explain everything, and hope your child now knows what they need to know. And that idea, it's everywhere. And that puts so much pressure on parents, because it makes sex ed feel like this huge event that you need to prepare for, to get right and somehow finish. But for autistic tweens, that whole setup often works against learning. When parents have one big sex talk, they usually do it with good intentions. They want to make sure that their child knows enough, and they want to be thorough and cover the important stuff as well. They also want to protect their child. But what often happens is that their autistic tween gets hit with too much at once. Too many topics, too many words, too much sitting down, and pressure to learn and pressure to react in the right way. And for autistic kids, that can be a lot, because even when the information is good, the way it's delivered might still be too much. So you might sit down meaning to talk about puberty, and suddenly you're covering periods, erections, masturbation, consent, porn, online safety, privacy, relationships, and body boundaries all in one go. That's a lot for anyone. It's a lot for me to even say. And for an autistic tween, it can quickly tip into overload. So what you might see is shutting down, walking off, getting silly, getting irritated, saying, I know, changing the subject, or going completely quiet. And a lot of parents hear that and think, they don't want to learn this, or they're just not mature enough, or they're refusing. But often it's much simpler than that. It's just too much for them. Too much information, too much pressure, too much too fast. And if the conversation feels intense, your child may end up remembering the pressure more than the information. And that matters, because when sex ed starts to feel like something overwhelming, kids are less likely to want to come back to it later on. And this is where a lot of parents get disheartened because they think the conversation failed. But that's not always true. The bit that I really want parents of autistic tweens to hear is this: silence does not mean it did not end. No reaction does not mean they did not take anything in. Delayed questions don't mean you missed your chance. And not responding in the moment when you're talking doesn't mean that the conversation was pointless. A lot of autistic kids, they process after the conversation, not during it. They may need time. They might need space. And they may need the pressure to drop before their brain can even sort out what was said. So you might talk to them about something and get absolutely nothing back. No questions, no comments, no sign they've taken it in. And then later, sometimes hours later, sometimes days later, they ask something very specific. Or they mention one part of what you've said. Or they come back to it in the car or at bedtime or while you're doing something else like washing the dishes. And that is not failure. That's often just how their processing in their brain works. And honestly, this is one of the biggest mindset shifts for parents, because if you're expecting a clear response in the moment, you'll probably think that the conversation bombed. But if you understand that a lot of autistic kids learn quietly, later, or sideways, you stop needing that immediate feedback as proof that it worked. And that's a really big shift. It means you can stop putting so much pressure on the moment, and you can stop treating the conversation like a test. And you can also stop thinking that you need eye contact, questions, or a neat little, okay, I understand, at the end. Because real learning does not always look tidy. And once you understand that, it becomes much easier to do sex ed in a way that actually fits your child, which brings us to what works better instead. So if one big talk usually backfires, what do you do instead? You teach in layers. And that's the change. Not one huge conversation, lots of small ones. Not one big information dump, but one clear piece at a time. Not pressure to cover everything, permission instead to build it slowly. And this is what usually works better for autistic tweens. Short conversations, clear language, one topic at a time, and the understanding that you can always come back to it later. So instead of thinking, tonight I need to explain puberty, you might think, tonight I'm just going to explain what puberty means. And that's enough. Or instead of, I need to cover consent, you might say, today I'm just going to say that your body belongs to you. And that is enough too. Or instead of doing one big talk about online safety, you might say, if you ever see something online about bodies or sex that confuses you, you can tell me about it. You won't get in trouble. It's okay to tell me about this stuff. And that counts. And that's what I mean by layered sex ed. Small, clear, repeatable, no drama, no giant performance, just steady teaching over. And the beautiful thing about this is that it takes pressure off everyone. It takes pressure off you because you do not have to do it all in one go. And it also takes pressure off your child because they do not have to take it all in, respond and prove they understood on the spot. And that is usually when sex ed starts to feel more normal and less like an event, more like part of everyday life. And that is what we want. Because sex ed, it's not one talk, it's lots of little conversations over time. And that is what makes it safer. That's also what makes it clearer. And also, that is what makes it more likely that your child will actually come back to you later on. So, if you've been thinking, I just need to find the right moment to sit down and do the whole talk, I want to gently say this. You probably don't. You probably just need to say one clear thing and then another clear thing later. And that is usually a much better fit. And if you're listening and thinking, okay, Kath, that sounds much more doable, but what does it actually sound like in real life? Well, that is exactly where I want to help. So if this episode has you thinking, okay, I can see now that I've been putting way too much pressure on one conversation and you want help making sex ed feel clearer, simpler, and more durable, that is exactly why I created my neuro-affirming sex ed guide. It's designed to help you teach bodies, privacy, consent, boundaries, and safety in ways that are clear, practical, and easier for neurodivergent kids to process. So instead of feeling like you need one big perfect talk, you can start having smaller, calmer, and more useful conversations. And if that sounds like what you need, you can go and grab it at neuro-affirmingsexed.com, or it's in the show notes below, because you do not need to make sex ed bigger. You just need to do it in a way that fits your child best. So here is your 1-minute challenge for today. Choose one topic and reduce it to one sentence. Just one, not a full explanation, not a whole talk, one sentence. Something like, puberty means your body will change as you get older, or masturbation means touching your own genitals because it feels good and it happens in private. Consent means people do not get to touch your body just because you did not know what to say. And that's enough. Because that is how layered sex ed starts. One clear sentence, one small moment, and one conversation that does not try to do everything. You don't need to cover it all today, and you don't need a giant talk, and you do not need proof that it landed straight away. You just need to start building it one layer at a time. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Sex Ed for Tween Parents. And if this episode helped, I'd love it if you left a quick review. It helps more parents find the podcast and realize that they do not have to do this the hard way. And don't forget to grab that Neuro-Affirming Sex Ed guide at neuro-affirmingsexed.com or in the show notes below. Next episode, we're going to be talking about why autistic tweens often need more detail, not less. And happy talking.